What up, Sci-Fam? It's your boy Nickel, and today we are going to be looking at sex cells, the cells that are involved in human reproduction. So make sure that you put a title on your page, and we're going to look at the two different types of gametes or sex cells that are involved in human reproduction. All right, let's get started here. So, gametes is a really important word here because that's really the word that summarizes or is used to describe sex cells. So gametes are basically just the reproductive cells that contain they're reproductive cells that contain half of the genetic information needed to form a new organism. Now in this case, it's a new human, but it could be any organism. And so all organisms have two different sexes, for the most part, at least, that contribute half of the DNA. The other sex contributes the other half of the DNA. That's in any type of sexual reproduction. Now organisms can also just copy themselves through asexual reproduction, but we'll get more into that later on when we learn about genetics. So for right now, as we look at human reproduction, gametes are those reproductive cells that contain half of the genetic information needed to form a new organism. And since we're talking about human reproduction, those gametes are going to be coming one from half of the genetic information. One cell comes from the male, the other comes from the female. So with humans, human DNA consists of 46 chromosomes. And those 46 chromosomes are made up of 23 chromosome pairs. So there's 23 chromosome pairs of 2 then. Each chromosome has a partner chromosome. So for 23 different sets of chromosomes, if there's 2 of each of them, that means we have a total of 46 chromosomes. All right, so we're going to look at the difference between the female gamete and the male gamete. And if we start here with the female gamete, this is also known as the egg cell, or also known as the ova. And since it comes from the ovaries, that's how we get this term ova, or maybe vice versa. But there's only one ova, or one egg cell, per menstrual cycle. So every time a female has her period, that process of the period, the periodization, typically once per month, is actually related to the egg moving through the female reproductive system. And so there's only one egg that's actually going to be present at a time. Only one egg per time, so there's one per menstrual cycle. And this will become important as we compare this to how it's different in the male gamete. So I'll put a little slashy line around there. So the female gamete, or the egg or the ova, contains 23 chromosomes because that's half of the genetic information. All right, let's get a new color here. So this picture over here I drew of an egg cell. And this layer on the outside is kind of like a gooey jelly layer that helps surround the overall cell. Inside of the cell, there's a bunch of different organelles. These organelles on the outside, these have enzymes inside of them. So make sure that you draw yourself an egg cell here with a bunch of packets of these enzymes. And we'll define what those are here in just a second. Now this dark circle here, this is going to be the nucleus. So I'll draw some DNA strands inside of the nucleus. Again, remember there's 23 chromosomes inside of the nucleus here. I'm not going to draw all 23 sets of chromosomes, but I'll put some DNA strands, helixes in there just to help represent that. Now each of these little kidney bean looking things, these are all of our mitochondria. And so these are going to provide energy for the egg cell. So I'll draw some lines here so that they have the appearance of a mitochondria. All right, so let's define what each of these different organelles is doing inside of this female gamete, or the egg cell. So those packets of enzymes, those are called cortical granules. And cortical granules contain enzymes which help break things apart. So enzymes that make sure the egg is only fertilized by one sperm. Because if the egg cell has 23 chromosomes, it only needs 23 more. So we only want to add one sperm cell to this egg for fertilization so that it has the necessary number of chromosomes. We don't want too few, and you can't have too many either to make a new organism, a new human. So these cortical granules make sure that just one sperm can fertilize the egg. All right, this kind of like gel layer here on the outside, let's see if I were to color it in here. It's like this gel layer here. Goes all the way around the egg, and this actually helps protect the egg. So there's like the kind of gel outside, and this is called the Zona Pellucida. The Zona Pellucida is the thing that protects the egg. So it's kind of like the shell, but the shell is like a hard thing if you think about like a chicken's egg. The Zona Pellucida is like this jelly substance that protects the outside of the egg, and it's the location where the sperm is going to dock to the egg. So the sperm swims to the egg, and then it kind of gets here and it sticks to the Zona Pellucida, and we'll learn about how that sperm then gets inside of that egg cell. All right, again, these little kidney bean shaped things, those are our mitochondria. And in an egg cell, a human's female gamete, there are something like 100 to 200,000 of these mitochondria. This egg cell is going to one day become, if it gets fertilized by the sperm, it's going to become a full human. And so it needs tons of energy to be able to go through mitosis to make more and more cells. So there's lots of mitochondria in there. And then remember this circle here in the middle, this is our nucleus. And inside of the nucleus is our DNA. So it's our nucleus with DNA. And something interesting is that the female gamete is actually the largest diameter cell in the human body. And it's only in females. And this is something like 0.12 millimeters in diameter, which will be important because if we think about the sperm, when we contrast the size of the sperm, we can use this to kind of get a sense of the scale of these different cells. All right, so that's the female gamete. The male gamete is on deck next. The male gamete. The male gamete is also known as the sperm. Now, the sperm is pretty interesting, and there's some interesting folklore about the sperm. Before there were microscopes, people really didn't know how humans got pregnant. There were some interesting ideas. One of them that really stuck with me the most is this idea that the man had this seed within him, which we now call the sperm, and inside of every single sperm, there's a little tiny micro-human in the head of the sperm. So it says here at the top, the man, the seed, woman, the incubator. So it was thought to be that the men would have sperm that had these little humans inside of them, that then once they're inside of the female, they would then be able to go through some incubation process to become a baby. And that's, oops, we don't want to cancel. That's not what is happening. So let's look at what we now know now that we have microscopes. Well, we have the male gamete, which is the sperm. And I drew a picture here of a sperm where it's got this kind of head followed by this tail. So this part, this top part we call the head, and this end part we call the tail. Now in the head we have some proteins in here. And these proteins, we'll just draw some with some little squiggly lines. These are called acrosomal proteins. And these acrosomal proteins are in the head of the sperm because these are going to be the things that helps the sperm get through that zona pellucida that we were just talking about. So the acrosomal proteins break down the zona pellucida so that that sperm can fertilize the egg. So in order for that sperm to actually get to the egg, it has to break that jelly stuff down and actually get closer and closer and closer until it can enter that egg cell. All right, well, behind the acrosomal proteins, these proteins are released to get through the Zona Pellucida. Behind that, we have a similar structure as the egg where we have our nucleus, and inside of the nucleus, we have our DNA. So I'll draw some DNA helixes. And just like the egg cell, the male gamete contains 23 chromosomes, and these are the other 23 chromosomes that are needed to make a complete human. So half of the chromosomes are coming from the sperm, the other half are coming from the egg. That's why we are a combination of our parents, because we get half of our DNA from our mom, and the other half comes from our father. All right, so if we then continue looking at this, this is our nucleus. Let's label that, and that has our DNA in it. And these little things behind the nucleus are just like in the egg, and now we have some mitochondria. But this sperm is not going to go through mitosis to produce this young baby. It's just going to drop off the DNA, and the DNA will then combine with the DNA inside of the egg. And so the main purpose of this mitochondria is to allow the tail to work. Let's get a new color here. So when we look at the mitochondria, they're important, mitochondria, because the mitochondria's job is to work the tail, and the tail's job is to get that DNA inside of the egg. So the mitochondria power the tail for swimming. So these are mobile cells. These are single cells that swim until they swim to try to locate the egg. When they get to the egg, the proteins dissolve the Zona Pellucida, drop off the DNA inside the cell, and then that DNA combines with the DNA inside of the egg cell to then fertilize the egg and produce that new cell that's going to develop into a human. Now, something that is mind-blowing is that sperm are much more plentiful than the female gamete, the egg, is. Every single time that a male ejaculates, there is something like 250 to 280 million sperm per ejaculation. So there is a lot, especially when we compare it to the female gamete. Also, when we talked about the egg cell being the largest cell inside of a human, the male gamete, the sperm, is 10,000 times smaller than the egg cell. So up here, when I drew that little tiny sperm coming in on the side of this egg, that's actually a close representation of the size difference between the two. But remember, the sperm only needs to drop off the DNA to combine with the female gamete's DNA. So there you have it. We have our female gamete and our male gamete. When they come together, each of them is going to drop off 23 or contain 23 chromosomes. That when they're combined, you have a total of 46 chromosomes, which is what is necessary in order to have a complete human DNA. So there you have it. Let's now learn about the next step of fertilization. So I'll see you in the next science notebook page video. See ya.